Veteran journalist N. Ram has written an exclusive story in his paper, The Hindu, which claims India agreed to pay 41% more per aircraft for 36 Rafale jets as compared to the price negotiated in 2007 by the UPA government. Accounting for escalation costs inbuilt into the deal, the premium India under the Modi government has agreed to is 14% more as compared to 2011. Core to this increase in cost per aircraft was the decision to purchase 36 jets instead of the original 126, which meant the 1.3 billion euros the makers of the aircraft, Dassault Aviation, charged us was spread over fewer planes and hence pushed the price per plane up significantly. To talk more about the findings of this crucial report, we're joined now by the chairman of the Hindu Publishing Group and, of course, the author of the story, N. Ram. Thank you for speaking with us at Bloomberg Quint, Mr. Ram. Just to understand first the significance of what you have found and reported on in your article, because there has been so much material and a series of revelations, so to speak, on the Rafale deal. What is the significance and impact of what you have said?
I think it's we'll see, it's unfolding, and I see that on Twitter there's a lot of comments on this and a lot of shares and so on, and a lot of enthusiasm. There's also some pushback, but not very much so far. I think, as you said, a lot has been written on Bofors, and I think there have been briefings, background briefings by military officials as well as civilian defense officials. And some questions have been answered, but this is different because we took a close look at the claims of the government and the cost, and also the decision to reverse the trend of the last decade. All of a sudden in 2000, there was no warning for what Mr. Modi announced or what was announced in the joint Indo-French statement in Paris in April of 2015. It was a new deal, in fact, that's the argument. And so what we have found is they're saying fixed cost, it doesn't matter how many aircraft, because this is fixed. What is fixed? I think it's an extortionist amount. They claimed 1.4 billion euros first, and that was bargained down to 1.3 billion euros for just design and development of these India-specific enhancements. We have the list, but we have chosen not to reveal it at this point. But enough has been published on what these enhancements were. So I think Dassault refused to budge on this, and I think it is certainly controversial that the Indian negotiators and the Indian government, Mr. Modi must take responsibility for this, have not been able to prevail in this. So the simple argument is it relates to economies of scale.
Yeah.
If you have 126, if it's a non-recurring fixed cost, then it's shared much more reasonably. But if you're buying only 36 aircraft and they still insist on this non-recurring or fixed amount, which I would say is highly exaggerated or extortionist even, I think then you're striking a bad bargain for India. That's the argument. We've not used strong language or too much editorializing. It's fact-based, this particular story. Of course, the Hindu may write editorials and so on. That's a different matter. But I largely believe that while interpretation is all right, but if you sound too judgmental, then I think the story, you get mixed up and the story loses its force and persuasion.
No, absolutely. This story does put a certain set of facts forward, but let me ask some questions which emerge on reading it. Like you said yourself, it seems to be merely a question of economies of scale. To present the counter argument, if Dassault is going to spend on design and development and create technology that India wants, is going to cost them a certain amount. And then if India decides to buy 36 instead of 126 or even 2 aircrafts instead of 200, they're still going to have to pay the cost. We have to pay the cost. So it could be argued that this was inevitable. There was no way out of this the moment we decided to buy less aircrafts, and in that sense it may not be such a big deal.
It was not inevitable because you didn't have to buy only 36 aircraft, and it's not just economies of scale, because another thing happened which is in my story. That is, there was an overture, if you like, from the L2 party, which is the Eurofighter Typhoon Consortium. 4 countries are involved, and Airbus, as has been mentioned in the story, representing them, wrote a letter to Arun Jaitley in 2014. Presumably, some message went to them saying, "Yeah, do this," because that's in the first line of the story which I quoted. So you could argue it certainly looks like a new deal they were crafting. That is the Indian government, the French government, and Dassault, because the French government came in directly for the first time. It was going to be it's an intergovernmental agreement, as distinct from a direct commercial contract with the vendor. So the deal changed. So for them, and then moreover, all these issues were raised in the Indian negotiating team. Three people who specialized in finance, as against 4 others, consistently and persistently objected to it or put forward alternative. For example, the three dissenters said that let's compare the price, which is going to emerge from this overture or outline of a bid by Eurofighter, the consortium, and it looked mouth-watering on the face of it. The offer, they made a 20% discount, setting up a production line quickly, an industrial park, providing support and training. All these, of course, are on paper, but this has to be realized. And finally, most interestingly, perhaps, apart from the 20% discount, the accelerated delivery by prospectively diverting deliveries meant for Germany and the other 3, UK, Italy, and Spain. So that looked like a pretty good rival offer at this stage. When you are crafted, that's the argument. You're crafted a new deal, so you can't hide behind the old rules. Whether it's a CBC
but you know, as you say in your story, Mr. Ram, as you say in your story yourself, that in the negotiating team, in the Indian negotiating team, there were 7 members and 3 raised some of the concerns that you have laid out in your story, but they were overruled by the other 4, and the vote was 4 versus 3, and in the end, the majority of that team decided that it was against procedure to go back to the second vendor, which was Eurofighter in this case, and they couldn't possibly have done it. So let me put that question to you. Is this a case of poor bargaining, and was India, in your view, really in a position at that stage of negotiation, after the Prime Minister has gone and committed and publicly announced that we're buying these 36 aircrafts, was India actually in a position to say that, hey, listen, we have another offer from a guy who's willing to sell it to us for less, so why don't you bring down your price? You know, it sounds like good bargaining, but could we have done it?
Of course you could have done it, because what actually happened, the Prime Minister preempted the whole consideration by the Indian negotiating team by more than a year when these things came up. And once the Prime Minister speaks his mind, a powerful Prime Minister like Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and they issue it in a joint statement with the French Prime Minister, then the matter is preempted or even settled. After that, what leverage would the negotiators have? But have you ever come across a situation where 3 out of the 4 in a negotiating team had a different view or even objections to virtually every contentious issue that they negotiate? This is not a part of standard practice. You would expect negotiators to largely agree. Maybe there are some differences, but here on every single of the 10 issues, they disagreed, and disagreed sharply, diametrically, I'd say. Do you want to talk to Eurofighter? Yes, say 3. No, say the others, hiding behind the defense procurement procedure and the CBC guidelines. Where do they say that if a new deal, are they still L1? is Dassault still L1 in this case? 126, the earlier 126, which broke down into 18 flyaway plus 108 to be made by HAL. HAL is jettisoned, thrown out of the window after the Dassault CEO, chairman and CEO himself went on record to say 90% of the negotiations are over. Maybe they were prolonged, but you could have speeded it up. So you certainly could have made a strong case, a sporting case, for saying that this is a new deal. It's not for 126. There's no indigenous manufacturing, no make in India in this case. And therefore, we go back to the drawing board. Or, I mean, L1 doesn't mean the deal is over. You've got to still negotiate the fine details. And if you think the cost, if you determine that the cost is not right, they're asking too much for the design and development of the India-specific enhancements, they won't bring it down below 1.3 billion euros, then I have every right to walk away from that deal. And the other offer is available. All that the three dissenters asked was, let's compare the prices. And even that is struck down. Yeah. Because they wanted to, because the Prime Minister had spoken. And then the other thing, the procedure is that the Defense Minister and the Council was fully empowered to take a decision, and maybe the final decision is made by the Cabinet Committee on Security. Here they abdicated. Mr. Parrikar did not do that, because if you read the government notes that are available, given to the Supreme Court and shared with a group of petitioners, they're already published in the Wire and so on, you will see that they don't speak about any further role for the DAC, the Defense Acquisition Council. So the Defense Minister, the word I think used was progressive to the Cabinet Committee on Security. He really passed the buck to them. He had no role, it seems. So this is very odd, because he was as clueless when the announcement was made in Paris as anyone else, it appears. So
you say in your story, and of course you talk about Bofors, your coverage in your paper's coverage of Bofors, I think, is in journalism folklore now. And you refer to the Bofors case, and you point out how it is different from Rafale at this stage, in as much as there was some kind of a money trail that investigative journalists found in Bofors. There is none here, which brings me to the crux of what this entire controversy is about. Is there any corruption then, or is the charge right now of perhaps poor negotiating skills that the government of the day may have bungled up by not getting India the best deal out there?
I think journalists and others can investigate put in more effort to find this out. In the case of Bofors, we were lucky that documents, Chitra Subramaniam found the struck gold, as we say, in Stockholm. And but then it was a long story. It was a very complex story, which had to be pursued over more than 2 or 3 years. But we did have in hand those bank documents where proof that commissions had been paid, and these were percentage payments on every delivery made by Bofors. So that was good. And also you found a lot of other material, including on decision making. So my simple point is, comparisons have been drawn, not by me, but by various others. For example, Arun Jaitley, for example, the opposition alleging corruption. This is bigger than Bofors. Certainly the amounts involved are much bigger than Bofors. So I'm just watching it, and you have 3 petitioners, Yashwant Sinha, Arun Jaitley, and Prashant Bhushan, go to the Supreme Court and also come out with a very strong statement alleging criminal misconduct. But it's a story in progress, and as I've said, this is not the last you're going to hear about Rafale, Rafale.
Yeah, Mr. Ram, the thing with this, sure, the thing with this, with the Rafale story is, of course, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing, if you don't mind, the business of crony capitalism has been written and alleged on that. I use the word shown or alleged. In some cases, they have demonstrated it. In other cases, it's simply an allegation that money must have changed hands and so on. I'm not mentioning any individual here, but that is on record. They talk about crony capitalism. So far, in the government's choice of offset partners, that's the allegation made, and we have not found anything specific on that, and nor have I looked for it. This is a highly focused story because the government has stubbornly refused to reveal pricing details, full pricing information, not even given to Parliament or to a privileged committee of Parliament. There's nothing secret or that needs to be secret or confidential about pricing. The whole thing should be revealed. Nothing, the agreement to the French, as the French government has made clear, doesn't prohibit the Indian party, it's an intergovernmental agreement, from disclosing the pricing details, the breakdown and so on. But why have they not explained? They've given the total figure. Even there's a controversy about the benchmark price, which is determined by financial experts largely. And everyone knows it was raised suddenly, allegedly at political behest. But
I just want to come. I just want to come to. Yes, I just want to come to one last important point on the entire controversy as a whole. And of course, your story is one very crucial bit of where the narrative has gone forward with Rafale. Once the Supreme Court pretty much refused the petition of Prashant Bhushan, Arun Shourie and Yashwant Sinha, it seems like there is nothing much more to pursue and do at this point. Do you think the opposition in that sense seems to be shouting about an issue which doesn't have enough meat in it so far before something really solid comes up? Because there is no charge of corruption that is proven or any link to it either. The best case we have so far from the opposition's point of view is that perhaps a poorly crafted deal was struck, something which is underscored by your story.
No, I think there's more than that. If a decision is arbitrary and doesn't make sense, and the criterion would be the national interest or security, what you claim to be for national security and the strength of the armed forces and so on, whatever be the identification of the public interest, if it doesn't meet that test and it doesn't make sense, then I think there's a lot to answer for. It is true. I wouldn't say that there's nothing fishy about it. I don't want to speculate on that because there are various things that have been alleged, which is why there is a large literature already. But our story, I think, even if I say so or we say so, does take it forward because at the heart of the issue is pricing. Why? What is the pricing? The why and how of pricing for a Rafale fighter jet? Why did the government refuse to disclose it? It was not required by any agreement, and that I think leads to a certain line of investigation, which is what we did. But I think, as for the Supreme Court, clearly the Supreme Court's judgment was misinformed. Some of the facts have been corrected by Kapil Sibal and others on the record. It was given wrong information or perhaps jumped to certain conclusions. As I say, the Supreme Court of India is supreme, but it is not infallible.